Welcome, everyone. This is our fifth interview. And today we have Tim Barnes. This is part of an interview series called PMs Tackling Climate. And the idea and the goal here is to bring together product managers who are currently working on climate so that we could learn about what are the problems that they're currently working on and how it differs on their jobs in comparison to like PM in non-climate industries. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Fadi. I'm a student graduating in December. I'm currently interning at Datadog, and I'm one of the co-organizers here. I also have my other co-organizer, Chi.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Chi, and I'm also a co-organizer for the PM channel here. I'm currently working as an intern at Activates Global and a student also.
So Tim, could you just introduce yourself briefly to the audience, and we can start the conversation.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Tim Barnes. I'm the VP of Growth and Product at Inspire. So I've been between engineering and product really most of my career outside of early on with some healthcare work. So it's been about 13, 14 years in engineering and product, and early stages starting in like very early companies like 0 to 1. And in the last half or so of my career, kind of moving into like the 1 to 2 kind of phase of the company. So excited to be here.
Yes, thank you for your time today, Tim. So can you, just to start, can you share a little bit about your background? What do you study so that people can get to know you better?
Yeah, so I don't think I've ever met a product manager that's studied product, although that is a more recent path for folks. So I actually have a very different background. Originally, undergrad studied both health psychology and philosophy, and then moved into studying public health, medicine, epidemiology. And then during the recession, while I was studying epidemiology, needed a job, needed some income. So I took a job with a company called Cricket Media, and I started there as a software engineer. I had written, basic code early in my life and kind of applied that to that use case. And given that it was a recession, we went through some downsizing, and I ended up taking on a much bigger responsibility than I probably should have, but learned a lot during that time there. And ultimately, we took it public. So went from like a really hard time of losing a lot of really great employees to really building it up to over 300 people in just a few years. And then going through the IPO, which was an exciting time and gave me the bug for the world of software.
Yeah, that sounds like a good journey. So why did you pursue an academic career in health? What sparked your interest in health, and kind of why did you end up working as a software architect right after school?
Yeah, so, I think the journey into health was really, again, kind of by accident. Started taking some psychology courses, moved into more like health psychology and understanding like human behavior. Like if somebody knows that, say, cigarette smoking is not great for your health, why did they do it? And so once I started getting into that, it really became pretty fascinating and starting to understand how you can have an impact on problems you see all around you. So even within your own family, as you see people with like diseases and going to the hospital, you start to feel helpless, right? Like, what do I do about this problem that I see? And I don't think it's dissimilar really to like the climate space. I mean, I think every day, it's like, what do I do to affect climate change? It's almost like beyond overwhelming. Do I reduce my plastic use? Do I reduce my electricity use? Do I stop driving a car and just sit in the dark and turn off all the lights? Like, what do I actually do to affect this thing? And so I think similar with the healthcare space, it's like it gives you some empowerment to feel like you have a hand in it.
So you started working at Cricket Media, and which develops education products for teens. for about 3 years. And then you started your own telemedicine company. And then after that, you joined a number of healthcare startups as their VP product and engineering, which is about the time where you joined Arcadia. So could you kind of like explain to us like what Arcadia is and why did you join it after, the series and set of companies that, you join and you develop products at?
Yeah, so I think sort of like the Slack space that you all have created here. There's one in the DC area for DC Tech Slack. Joined the network and just started learning more about like the DC startup space, and came to know Kieran and Ryan, the founders of Arcadia, just through that network, and happened to have a neighbor who was in the solar space, working with the Department of Defense. And just by happenstance, after multiple conversations with Ryan and Kieran, I was like, I don't really understand what this is or how it works, but had a long road trip with my friend and neighbor, who gave me a 12-hour spiel on how it all works. So it became pretty exciting. And at the end of the road trip said, this seems like a journey worth taking. So I called them up and felt like it was a great opportunity. Again, it was really like very much still in the 0 to 1 phase of early days of sandwich boards, going to the farmer's market to recruit initial customers, but you got to do what you got to do. And really building the product from its infancy and then bringing it to scale, which is, it's honestly just exciting to see when you have a couple hundred customers. That already is exciting when you had 0. But then to see that couple hundred move into 80, 100,000 customers in just a couple of years becomes really exciting. And you see what the fruits of your labor are, and how software allows you to have this sort of network effect. And that's the same thing that I felt with healthcare. It's like doctors, nurses, PAs, everybody has a huge effect on healthcare. But obviously you're capped. You're one person, you can only do so much. And within the software space, I just found a personal opportunity to say, you can scale this to a much broader audience and have a much broader impact on lives.
So as a force multiplier almost, just beyond your own direct impact. That makes sense. So like you mentioned you joined Arcadia in the beginning, and you like your role was VP product and engineering. What were you doing, and like what did you do, and what were your biggest challenges at Arcadia?
Yeah, so I think anyone who has been in a startup before knows that you need to wear all the hats, because you don't have people, right? So the company prior to that, I remember, we'd have an investor meeting one morning and I would be the VP of product and engineering there. The investors coming in and the office manager was out sick. And so I'm the one at like 6:30 in the morning clearing soda cans off people's desks and like sweeping the floor, because that's what you have to do. So similar with Arcadia, we had, I think, 2 engineers when I started. So I would spend half my day actually still writing code, building some of the initial product that we were trying to bring to market. And then also trying to define like the strategy of where we're trying to go. And it's a tricky balance because you need to be at the 30,000 foot level and understand what are customers asking for in this space that they know nothing about. And frankly, I knew nothing about at the time. And you also have to be in the weeds to say, I need to deliver this like, minute little thing to production tomorrow. So it really was everything. And anyone who hasn't been part of a startup, I'd highly recommend it, at least once in your life. It will give you gray, I promise you that. But it's worth it because it does allow you to just go beyond your like specific role, and not only learn how to play a part in these other roles, but also empathize with them, right? So what you start to learn over time is like, for instance, at Inspire, our MX team is like the hub of information. So this is the member experience team, the people who are fielding, not only inside sales calls, but also support calls. They're the front lines. And those are the people you want to talk to every single day to understand where users getting tripped up, what are they asking for, how can we change our product to be better for our customer?
I'm just going to follow up on that and ask, how did you balance, like you said, because it's a challenge, like being an engineer and being the product manager. How did you balance that responsibility?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with the term ruthless prioritization, it will become very familiar to anyone in product. You have to go into every day and say, what is the one thing I cannot leave today without having gotten finished? And that nothing else matters. I mean, beyond that, it's like, that's the one thing I need to do. Anything else I do on top of that is gravy. But it really allows you to remain focused and getting just honestly the most important things completed over time.
So after Arcadia, you joined Instacart, which was another startup at the time. And Instacart is an online grocery delivery and pickup service. So, and for almost 2 years, you worked as a senior engineering manager. So how did you identify a good startup to work at?
Yeah, so one thing that I take pride in my career is that I tend to move to different companies, and people that have worked with me at other companies move with me. It's honestly like the most prideful thing I have in my career. And so happened to be that somebody I'd worked with at a previous company we weighed his different offers between Instacart and Amazon at the time, and sat down for a couple hours. And at the time I had just joined Arcadia, and I was kind of like, this Instacart seems like kind of a cool place. But we kept in touch over the years, and he reached out and said there's a great opportunity. And for me, I think I was at a point in my own career where I said, the startup world has been great to me in many ways, but it's also extremely tiring. And so this was an opportunity to kind of move into a larger company, although it was still very small and nimble at the time. But also really learn from the best of the best, right? I mean, when I moved out to the Bay Area, I realized, it is a kind of force multiplier out here too. I mean, things just are different. And, I think it was also an opportunity to say, hey, I've been the top sort of rung of like, product and engineering at multiple companies for years. And while that was like great and all, I realized I still had a lot more to learn. So moving into a place like Instacart, and reporting into our VP of engineering, who spent 20 years at Google, and more recently, it's like those are people that I just learned an infinite amount of knowledge from. So it was a really great time.
Yes, and Instacart has been, growing so quickly. And so why did you leave Instacart when it was growing so quickly like that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an easy decision. So I was speaking with our founder CEO at Inspire for probably 4 months, weighing the decision. But I, was excited about the prospect of coming back into the climate space. I knew that there's just so much great work that could be done there. And I felt like I had kind of left things unfinished, I think, when I had walked away from Arcadia. So I really saw the opportunity, but at the same time, I loved my role at Instacart. I loved the people I worked with. I was learning a ton. So there really wasn't anything that I was like unhappy about. So it was a tough decision, but ultimately, sort of decided this was an opportunity to get back into climate. And then the other thing that was exciting to me was, yes, I was over the startup space, in part because I was sick of joining a company and wondering, are we going to actually be able to pay the bills at the end of the day? And you're feeling like that for years. So this was an opportunity at Inspire where for years we were an electricity supplier, but had no real product. And so what we've been doing here is effectively building a startup within the rest of the company. And so it is actually not only funded, but you have like the human resources and things like that available to really accelerate your growth in a way that would take years and years, at an infant company. I also see Michael Prescott on here, so I'll say, like, again, the people that I worked with at Instacart that were really amazing people.
So you peppered, just some details about Inspire. For those who are not familiar with Inspire, could you kind of like talk to us about what Inspire is, and like what are some of the things you do at Inspire?
Yeah, so at as I mentioned, Inspire is an electricity supplier. So for those not familiar with how this works, the US has regulated and deregulated energy markets. Most of the dereg energy markets are in the Northeast, at least for electricity. And what it basically means is that you have the ability as a consumer to choose who your electricity supplier will be. So you can call your utility and say, I heard of this company called Inspire. They offer 100% clean energy, and I want to switch to them as my supplier of choice, and then we'll switch. In regulated markets, it doesn't quite work that way. We don't have to get into that necessarily, but what we do as well at Inspire is we try to humanize this market and educate customers to empower them, because energy is a very low engagement category, right? If my lights turn on in the morning, I don't really think about my energy. That's the only time I would actually think about it, is if we have a power outage and then I'm calling PG&E. But otherwise, I don't think about it at all, which means I don't really understand how it works. And so as a consumer, you can realize just how deflating that is from an empowerment perspective, because I don't know how to control my bills. They're high in the summertime when it's really hot outside. They might be high in the wintertime if you have gas heating as well. And you don't really know how to make an effect on it, right? You get a bill in the mail, it's 30 days after the fact, it's all lumped into 1 month. And you have to think about your 30 days of behavior, which affected the not only price of that, but the usage of that, which is also the carbon footprint of your home. And so it's just way too much for anybody to take in and understand how they can make realistic changes to lower their not only bill, but also their carbon footprint. So first of all, we match everybody with renewable energy. Any usage that you have, whether it's high or low, we match it every month. But we also try to educate customers on taking control of their energy bill moving forward as well.
I'm just gonna poke on that. How do you, when you educate users on their energy bill, let's say they're at the happy path, they're educated and they know that perhaps they shouldn't be using, I don't know, the dryer as much, for example. Won't they be paying less to Inspire? And is that okay with Inspire in the end?
It is. So what Inspire does is we've also started offering energy subscriptions. So your supply rate with us will be a flat rate no matter what. So again, in the summertime, it's great because you don't have those same fluctuations in your bill. So you can start to plan more accordingly. So you could ask the question, do we lose money off the customer in things like the summer months? Yes, we do. But that's okay to us, because we feel like if we're offering a good enough service, that people will want to stay with us for the long haul. Do we make more money off of people in, say, the shoulder months? Yes, we do. But ultimately, it's sort of like an insurance policy for the customer. So that's a great opportunity financially. And yes, we still want to have people reduce their usage, not only because it honestly, it affects our bottom line, right? There are also bad actors out there who will always just lose money off the customer. They sign up for a subscription and then decide, well, I don't need to keep my thermostat at 76. I like it at 70 degrees now, and I'm just going to keep all my lights on during the day. We do have those people, and so we do lose money off of them. But again, so for our bottom line, we want to make sure that people are reducing it. But it's also completely on mission too, right? We want people to reduce their usage, because it does, even with clean energy matching, it does decrease the load on the energy grid, which means fewer and fewer non-renewable power sources have to turn on in order to meet that demand. And then lastly, it's better for the customer, right? Because if they continue to lower their bill down, we actually provide them with cash back on their bill, or eventually will lower their rate with us because it's better for them. And it obviously doesn't make sense to keep reducing usage over time and pay the same rate. So we've tried to align our mission with our margins, as well as with the customer benefit as well.
So a triple bottom line almost.
That's right.
Which makes sense. And so you mentioned a couple of products, if you will, the subscription path, and a number of them. I'm guessing they're supported or driven by product managers. Could you kind of talk to us a bit more about what do PMs do at Inspire, and when you're hiring for PMs, what do you look for in terms of their skills or experience?
Yeah, so at Inspire, we're kind of divided, I'd say, into like two sides of products. So one is more like internal facing, right? So we have our sales applications that our Salesforce use. We have our CRM that our member experience team use on a regular basis, and our ops team. And so these are tools that really affect and power the business, and frankly, powered the business exclusively for like 7 years. We never did digital enrollment for customers ever until the last year. Obviously, have to start doing that during times like COVID. And so that was really a first for us. And so these are tools that are like extremely critical to powering the business. And so if you think again about like ruthless prioritization, you could do that in a way where it's like, what is better? Is it better to increase like 20% conversion rate on our digital funnel? Or is it better to make 40 member experience team members more effective at their job? And I think part of the problem that we realized is like, those are apples and oranges, right? You can't really weigh those against each other because they're completely different. And so what we've done is we've kind of said, let's take that out of the equation. And so we've created a product org that does allow us to fully support the team that we have and make them as efficient as possible. Then we have a product org that is more external facing to the customer. So, owning things like our marketing website and our digital enrollment funnel, and ultimately the product that customers engage with, including like our smart thermostat integrations and things like that. And that's allowed us to be a lot more efficient. So what we look for really varies by role. We have kind of like growth focused folks who are much more like, let me look at the data, how are users like performing in the funnel? Like they think as well, we might even have a marketing background, thinking about how we're targeting people. But we have other people who are also very analytical within the product itself. How are people using a feature? Are they engaging with it? Are we, looking at this metric that we're trying to affect and actually affecting it? And so that's really one thing that we look for across the board, is that everybody's digging into the data and wants to understand not only like the quantitative data that you can find from like Segment and so forth, but also like the qualitative data, right? Doing user interviews, doing usability studies of new features that we're launching, and seeing how customers react.
So I'm just going to like try to summarize that. So ideally they would have like good experience with talking to customers, understand how to deal with like research or data, like being quantitative, qualitative. And also, it depends on the team that they join. Either is it customer facing or is it internal? Because that then really determines the problems they solve. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so you could think about it as if somebody is internal, we have people like, who are super experienced in say like the energy markets. And so they understand, the best ways that we can price customers such that, it's the lowest rate we can offer, where we're also not going to, lose out ultimately in any type of margin. So there are people that are really good at that. And then there are people that are like really good at say like have an ops background and understand how to like make people more efficient. And so those are like the best people suited for those types of roles. And then we have other folks who like really have like either a marketing background, a growth background, or just like a growth product background, and can drive like acquisition and activation of customers. And then people who really do know how to like think through the customer journey and life cycle over time. And again, this is a very unique market, because like, again, nobody really understands energy. Nobody really thinks about it. And so to come out of the gate and assume that like, I've never really engaged with my PG&E website other than like enrolling when I moved. After that, it kind of was over. And so to think that we're going to like create, say like an iOS application that people are going to open up 10 times a day, it's not going to happen, at least not for a long time. And so what we really need to be doing is like thinking about the customer mindset. And so that's another like unique group of people who can kind of like unpack the difficulty of the space that we're in.
That makes sense. And this question has been asked a number of times before, because you haven't mentioned it. Do you look for, and I think you peppered it a bit with your previous answer, do you look for like climate experience or energy specific experience?
I'd say it's a nice to have, and it does depend on the role. Like I think we have an open role right now for like pricing, for instance. And so I'd say something in like a climate or energy experience there, or maybe like an MBA background or something like that would be like really important. But probably less so for some of the other things. The reason that it is nice is because every new person that started at Inspire, whether they're on my team or not, I think most companies you go to and expect you're fully ramped in 90 days. And I've made it very clear for everybody that started here, don't worry about it if you're 6 months, 9 months in and you're still learning stuff, because you will. It is a tough space to understand, and it's a huge learning curve. And so the reason that like having that background is a nice to have is you can hopefully accelerate that learning curve quite a bit.
That makes sense. And so kind of like reflecting on your current job at Inspire, what are the biggest challenges you're facing right now?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is, like kind of moving from where we had been, right? Inspire was not a product company, 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago. So you're kind of taking not only like a fundamental shift in like strategy, but with that, you're having to shift like a lot of the mindset of the business and a lot of like the day-to-day operations of the business. And so, I think one of the things we've realized is we had been more traditionally like in departmental like silos to some extent. And that worsens, frankly, with COVID. It's like we're in enough meetings. And so like having more cross-functional, was not super welcome. And what ended up happening is like we realized it's a fragmented customer journey. So like the digital ads somebody might see, in our like, social media targeting or paid search or something like that could be fundamentally different than what's like on our social media pages. Could be fundamentally different than what our website says, could be fundamentally different than what our enrollment funnel says. And even the strategy for like who we're targeting kind of varied by department. Like, we realized our sales team is going after folks, of course, during the day, right? So who's home during the day? Well, these days, all of us, or most of us, but before that, like who's home during the day, tend to be people who, are older and oftentimes on a fixed income, right? So people who are much, much more price sensitive. And also, just from our research, haven't tended to be as, gung-ho about like making a huge change on climate change. And so we're realizing that like, if you put yourself in the mindset of a price sensitive person who doesn't care as much about like the impact, right? If your energy rates change at all versus like your introductory rate with us, you're gone, right? Because like the hook for the impact isn't necessarily there. And similarly, like if I'm worried about switching to clean energy as its effect on climate change, and I'm seeing a lot of like digital ads that are like targeting me on something like price, it's a weird sort of journey for me. And so what we've done is like we formed about an 8-week, 4 different cross-functional work streams focused on like our acquisition efforts, activation efforts, retention efforts, in competitive markets. And across the board, whether it's ops, sales, marketing, product, whatever, across the board, we've started to like map that entire journey and also all of the different trends in it. And then we've taken all of that data, synthesized it down, and we've now created a 3-year roadmap for where we want to go.
So Tim, as you have been, working in the climate space, how do you measure your personal impact?
Yeah, I think it's a few different things. I think first and foremost, like, outside of just the climate space, I think it's, career development for the team. So have you hired the right people? Are they advancing in their career? Are they staying with the company? I think that's a big part of it. And then I think within the climate space, it's I think it's talk, more than anything. If you start getting brand awareness out there, sure, it's great for, of course, the bottom line of the business and attracting new customers, but brand awareness also means that people start thinking about it. And so beyond even what we do directly as a company, which is clean energy supply, we also try to provide people with the empowerment that they need for other ways that they can make an impact. And so, I think as we continue to make those types of investments, it feels great to me that people are thinking about it, talking about it, sharing it with their friends and family, just because it does create that same network effect.
Thank you for answering all these questions, Tim. We felt like we've poked enough holes into your story, so we're going to bring some questions that were submitted in the registration form, and also I can see there's one question in the Zoom chat. If you have questions, it's not too late to share them. I see there's a question from Martin on the registration form. I'll just post his question here, but if he could just unmute himself and ask the question to Tim.
Yeah, hey Tim, thanks for doing this and Betty for organizing. Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same question that I asked earlier yesterday in the Slack channel, and I really consider myself to be that generalist, wearing all hats type of person, or that's what I've been in the past 2 or 3 roles, and I think that's where I'm most excited. But product is pretty much that space where I feel most, let's say, comfortable as well as excited in. And my question is really how to position myself. I'm not a traditional PM, as I mentioned yesterday. I don't even know what things like agile are. I would say I'm quantitative. I like to play with data. I love talking with customers, and I just love spending time with developers and designers. But I just find it a bit challenging to sort of explain to founders and to teams, okay, this is who I am and this is where I can bring most value. I'm not sure if it makes sense.
Yeah, so I think what I heard you say is, how are you positioning yourself as that generalist? Is that right?
Yes, that's pretty much the question.
Yeah, so I think you're right, especially when you talk about a 0 to 1 company. Generalist is what you need. You do want somebody who can wear many hats and can fill multiple roles. As you grow over time, I do think that even within product, you do get much more specialized in what you do. And that's what ultimately the company will need as you move forward. You need somebody, as you find product market fit through being the generalist at 0 to 1, you need somebody who is really good at growth, and somebody who knows the best tactics for acquiring customers in a scalable way. You need somebody who is really good at understanding retention mechanisms and how to drive that over time. And so, while journalists can also often have, some of those skill sets, I think you do want somebody who becomes very focused on specific work streams. There's a great article out there somewhere that's by Ravi Mehta, who was the CPO at Tinder, and it's called what is your shape as a product manager. And so he kind of maps out all of the different skill sets and things that you could be working on as a product manager. And then it kind of creates these different shapes, because no one generally is one thing. You don't necessarily want very, very specific and you have no idea how to do anything else. But it does start to find the shape, which helps you find and map where you grow as the company grows. So it's within the Reforge community, if you can find it out there, but it's an interesting article and definitely worth a read.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I found it. I'll post it in. Oh yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a great answer to anyone who's looking to, break into PM in this call. I see Greg has a few questions. Greg, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions?
Yeah.
Try asking one question so that we can like rotate through a bunch of people, and then I'll pick on you for sure again.
Totally. Yeah. Sounds good. Tim, I think the Inspire's story and the shift towards becoming a product company is just super interesting. And I know there's a lot of companies out there that sort of go through that, and would love to hear more from you about sort of how the company went through that mindset shift, what you found that worked really well, or maybe some of the challenges along the way, and any other advice you have for other companies going through that kind of transition.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say the transition isn't an easy one. It will be painful. I can guarantee you that. You also have to understand the audience, right? So are the folks that you're working with people who understand this market in general? Because if they don't, like, you also want to make sure that like you are like leveling up to them how this stuff kind of works. I think one thing that's worked well for me, don't tell any like college professors of mine, but plagiarism. And the reason I say that is because you can take the best practices from the best companies in the world and start to adopt those internally, right? There's lots of articles out there, like Ravi's is one of them. But like what I've brought to the table is like well-documented things from like, say, Hacking Growth, or, product-led organizations and things like that. And you can take those materials, and what it's saying is it's like, this isn't just Tim's opinion, or like especially biased opinion. This is something that is well documented that the highest growth companies in the world are doing on a day-to-day basis. And so, adopting those things actually starts to make sense. I think if you come at it from a perspective of, this is just what I want to do, because this is the way that I know, and I think it will end up reaching some roadblocks from that perspective. I think the other part is you kind of need to ease into it, right? You can't just expect that it's going to be a fundamental shift overnight. And you need to kind of choose where you want to like place your bets and priorities, so that it's not like a rip the Band-Aid, because you don't want to make enemies in the process. And so if done right, it can actually be very, very successful. And then ultimately, I think it leads to people being much happier, and see you as more of a thought leader in making that shift.
Awesome, thanks.
I was curious about that too, because I've seen Will Lawrence, a PM at Facebook. He has a blog that I really like, and one of his articles was describing how different companies are like engineering-led, design-led, some are product-led. And as I experience different companies, it's easy to see which team or which discipline leads the company. I see a question from Radha. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? If he's on the line with us still. Yeah. Okay. Okay, sure. No worries. I can ask the question on behalf of him then. So basically he's asking, how would you as a PM, how would you approach sort of the challenges in a country like India, where energy distribution is highly inefficient and people lack energy education? How would you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd also say it's not unique to India. The US has the same problems, right? Again, like I don't think people really do think about this space. And so I think one thing that is a critical mistake of many companies, whether it's in the climate space or not, is surfacing a user solution without surfacing a user problem, right? So like take Uber, for example. You could say, well, we can send somebody to pick you up. And it's like, well, what is the problem that I actually have in the first place? Like, why do I need somebody to pick me up? If I have a car or, taxis exist, like what is the actual problem with what exists today, then tell me what the solution is you bring to the table. So again, like I think with like the clean energy sector, it's like coming out and saying, hey, we offer clean energy. Like you should buy this now. Honestly, I think is a losing strategy, because what ends up happening is, as a customer, the first thing that's going to go through my mind is like, is my home not powered by clean energy? What is my home powered by? And what difference does it make in the end if it's powered by clean or not? Like, are there bad carbon emissions that are coming out of my home, and how much of that, and like what is the actual effect on climate change? And so all of these things are going to go through my head. And ultimately, I think it's going to create skepticism because I don't really understand this market or what's going on. And then in the case of a place like Inspire, no one's heard of us, right? Like they just haven't really heard of us before. And so there isn't really that brand awareness. And so now I'm both skeptical and I don't know who you are. And so I think then you end up just losing people's interest like almost immediately. So if you come instead to show value and insights to the customer up front, to say, actually, your home on average is 20% of your entire carbon footprint, and that can go away in 2 minutes. That's pretty powerful. And then you can start to say like, all right, PG&E or LADWP or whatever it is, your utility, you can start to say like, in general, like the energy mix in your area is only 10% renewable and the rest are coming from these sources. And you can even show them where the power plant is on a map. And so all of that starts to become much more tangible to a customer, and they understand like what's going on and how your product is actually like creating something of value for them. The last thing I'll say on that is, I think another mistake that many companies, especially companies who aren't like product focused or product led, is that they look at the product as a retention tool, right? I've signed up and I use this app or whatever. And I think it's a mistake because the product actually begins with acquisition. And so again, like understanding all of that journey at the top of the funnel and then bringing that into the actual engagement mechanism that you've created is critical. And I think it's a huge mistake to kind of forget about the fact that like the product is like all the way down at the end and not in the beginning.
Yes. So Tatiana, I think I saw you posted a question. Would you like to ask that?
Yeah. So I'm curious, if you're a PM with like absolutely zero climate experience, is it easier to get a PM role, considering that you said like it's preferable to have PM or like climate experience and or an MBA, or is it easier to actually just like start your own company since there's like a bunch of funding and momentum in this space?
Having started my own company and joined as a PM in these roles, I'd say both are very hard. Yeah, no, just to like reiterate, I don't think that you need the MBA or the climate experience necessarily. I think you do for certain roles. Like if you're talking about like the pricing and operating model that's driving like your underlying infrastructure and like, margin engine effectively. But, I actually think, any role in product, like whether it's in climate or not having a product background or discipline there can actually sometimes be advantageous for the industry. It's like, because you're coming with a fresh new set of eyes versus somebody who's been 10 years in the industry and thinking about it, right? Because then it's easy to get stuck in the mindset of like, well, I know how this works, so I don't understand why the customer doesn't know how it works. And so when you're coming in from those, like that fresh perspective, you can come to the table and say, I have no idea what's going on. And if you can't convince me, then you can't convince our prospective customers. So I'd say, I don't know if that really answered your question, but like, I do think it's still coming in from like a non-energy background is still great for the energy sector. I think it will, to some extent, likely make it harder to start your own company, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means probably a lot of reading. And especially in the energy sector, it means a lot of reading about like regulatory stuff.
There's a, we also had on the interview Laura, who also works in the energy space. And she mentioned a couple of times how a lot of her job is also thinking about regulation and being up to speed with it. So I'd really recommend you check it out as well. I see that as well, Iris actually asked a question in the forums. Iris, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, Tim. Definitely learning a lot here. So as someone who's basically like looking for a PM job right now, I'm curious, like, what are some factors you consider when you're choosing a PM role? How do you evaluate it? And also, what stage of startup would you think is like the best to join? Because I'm also currently interviewing with like from Series B to D, various stage of startup. So just curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah. So I'll answer the first part first, maybe. So as I like evaluate folks for roles, I try to start to understand how you think, and also like your communication style. So those to me are like very critical pieces of like the product world. So if you're thinking about it from an analytical perspective, and again, I don't mean like necessarily hard data, that could be part of it, but really thinking about like taking in that 30,000 foot view, understanding like the entire ecosystem that you're in, putting yourself in the customer shoes, looking forward to the future of like what are the market trends and where are those going. So I really look at it from that perspective first, like how are you thinking about this problem that you're trying to solve for? And then the second part is like, how do you communicate that out? So, you know, if you're kind of coming out and it's like a little rambly or disorganized, you know, I think those are places where I often see people get tripped up. The other part where I see people get tripped up is like oversharing, right? It's like people want to be succinct. When I send an email, like I take pride in the fact that it's very short. It has the details. You need whatever I need you to know, you can know in 5 sentences. Because if I make this giant email, nobody has time to read that, or they're going to be reading it while they're in the middle of like a Zoom call and take in 20% of it. So those are the two I think that are most critical. As far as evaluating like future facing like series B through D or early stage, I mean, it really is a personal choice. I do think that everyone should, at least at some point in their career, join a startup, because you will learn a ton. I mean, no MBA course or boot camp will teach you like the rough streets of a startup. But at the same time, you know, I would evaluate it from like, what can you learn? Because if you are just getting into the role and you're the only PM on the team, I would caution that to some extent, unless like the founders or something have a product background. And the reason I say that is because you really always want somebody that you can constantly like model from and learn from over time. And so the advantage of something that's like a later stage company is you're likely to be one of many, you know, and so you can learn from a lot of other people. The difference is you will also have a very narrow focus in the company that is that late stage.
I am seeing another question about Inspire from Ranjiv. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Would you like to ask that question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry if you already touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'm really curious about sort of what the major milestones are on Inspire's roadmap, kind of the time frame that you're playing those out within, and what the major hurdles are that you see in Inspire's path. And I'm asking because I'm trying to like kind of understand and get into the mindset of a PM at Inspire and kind of understand what it is that you're really like thinking about.
Yeah. And I think Greg was asking that too. I can't go into too much detail, unfortunately, especially because we still have to socialize it with our new parent company. But, you know, I can say like one thing we are trying to do is like go beyond, well, actually one thing I can definitely announce is like, we're going beyond just electricity. We're moving into the clean natural gas sector in like a week. So, you know, because we're trying to provide that net zero carbon future, right? Like that's our mission. And in order to do that, like your home can't be net zero if it's powered by both electricity and gas, but we're only matching your electricity. And so that's one sort of like first step of offering an additional service. Beyond that, like, you know, the theme is really like proliferation of products and services that we could offer. So, you know, we've kind of like scratched the surface on our smart home tooling. But what are ways that we can say like, okay, great that you have a Tesla or Prius and or any other electric vehicle, but if you're powering that off of like chargers off on the highway or even at home that are powered by, you know, coal, then it's not really clean, right, at the end of the day. And so we're kind of mapping all of that in the customer life cycle and you know, their whole lifestyle in general. And so that is really what we want to be providing to them, is a way that they can be either carbon neutral or carbon negative in their everyday life. So that's really like the longer term vision of like, beyond just electricity, beyond just the home, what are all of the things that we can offer to customers, you know, that eliminate their carbon footprint.
Thank you for answering that.
So we have, it's almost 12 o'clock, so there's 3 minutes left. I'll just ask a question I'll invite someone to ask the question, but at the full hour, would love to switch to the community side, so community circles. And you can ask your questions in the community circles as well. I see Daniel asked a question about mentorship. I'd love for him to unmute himself and ask this question.
Hi, yeah. So I just started a role in product without really knowing anything about product. And so I decided like a couple months ago that that's what I'm going to be doing, and I'm enjoying it so far. But now I'm thinking a lot about like mentorship and how to grow and whatnot. And I've realized over like the past few months, like people keep saying like, oh, I found someone who really inspired me and showed me the way and cleared the path. And I'm just like, how do you do that? Like, how do you find someone who does that, and how do you know you found them?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I'd say the same is true for like Tatiana and finding like, you know, potential co-founder, right? It's very difficult to do that, especially if you're newer to like the field, right? I get people all the time asking me to like help them evaluate like a technical co-founder because they have no idea what they're doing as far as like engineering is concerned. And so you're looking at somebody at face value and just saying like, is this a really good person or is it not? So I think it is tough. I think you should just look at products is probably the best way to do it. Look at products that you think you really think have cracked the code and provide a huge service, and reach out to people on LinkedIn. Just message some of the product managers there. You know, you'd be surprised, I think, at how many or how often people are like willing to take the time and chat with people about their own career or mentor them. I actually have to go at the top of the hour because I have a call with one of my mentees. And so, you know, it's something that you can definitely do. This happens to be through a service as well, called Plato. So it's platohq.com, which is a technical and product like mentorship program. And I volunteer to do it, as do many, many other leaders. So would highly recommend it. You know, I'd also recommend going through programs like Reforge, just reforge.com. Lots of different programs there that will be helping like upskill you in your own career. But it's also a network just like this one. And so between this network and, you know, Reforge or whatever it happens to be, like take advantage of those beyond just like the content that they provide. But participating in things like this on a regular basis, I think you'll meet people along the way, and certainly can just kind of pull the network for some advice over time.
I want to thank you so much, Tim, for just answering the questions and just sharing your knowledge with us. So I know you mentioned, I'll actually stop recording now.